Welcome everyone. Thank you for attending this evening's webinar. I just want to thank you for joining us attending. Today we're about to outline some significant changes to strata laws in New South Wales, and today provides for us a key overview to our owners. And one of our beliefs here at Jameson's is to ensure our clients are kept informed about these important legislative changes and updates and what it means for our clients, especially in this scenario when we talk about strata schemes and community associations. Now, before I commence today's session, I just would also like to acknowledge, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land of which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Now, Colin, I'll be touching base with you in terms of today's session, and I'll do a brief introduction as well. But I thought what we'd do is we'd do an overview of today's session and just cover off what we're going to cover. And again, these are comprehensive changes to strata legislation in New South Wales. We'll be discussing the philosophy of ensuring that you understand how these changes benefit your scheme, your property owners, strengthening governance in strata committees as well. Just a brief introduction, and we'll cover that through. We'll go through the details that are currently applicable from the 3rd of February. We'll also look at details of changes that are to be implemented by, say, the middle of 2025, I think the 1st of July. And then we'll conclude our session. And then if we've got some time, we will also facilitate some Q&A, some questions that may arise from today's session as well. My name is Paul Culby. I'm the group licensee here at Jameson's. I also introduced Colin from Strata Specialist Lawyers. I don't know how many years of experience is there, Colin, but I think we're becoming sort of the new generation of veterans within this industry. So I'd like to thank you for attending as a strata specialist lawyer, an industry expert for, I think it's over 20 odd years there. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So when we look at the phase of the implementation for these changes, we saw some changes effective on the 8th of November. That was what we call phase 1 and 3rd of February 2025. These changes compromised changes that applied in terms of penalty aspects, greater disclosures that came into place. But we've also got phase 2 that has recently been introduced by New South Wales Parliament, and these probably going to be in effect from the 1st of July. And they should be around sort of mid-July, mid or the beginning of July. Mid this year, we'll see those additional changes. And we're going to cover off what those changes are. And Colin, I'm going to be deferring to yourself in terms of an opinion as a strata law expert. We do have other reforms. These are all we're going to call phase 3 for the purpose of this session, that are part of some of these statutory reviews of the Strata Schemes Management Act. So we look at the current legislative changes here, and we know from the 8th of November and the 3rd of February, there's a lot of legislation that was impacted. When we look at this, we look at the Strata Schemes Management Act, the Strata Managing Agents Legislation number 65, the Strata Schemes Management Regulations, and then we came into the Community Land Management Act and the Community Land Management Regulations, and finally, most importantly, the Property Stock and Agents Act, whereby your Strata Managing Agents operate under. Now, phase 1, we currently had these changes applicable from the 8th and the November 2024 and the 3rd of February. And these sort of changes that came into place really looked at some approval requirements, timely updates of disclosures and commissions, having an annual disclosure in place, in addition to the commissions and training services. We also had provisions of pre-contract notices. So some of these aspects of pre-contract notices were about disclosures with original owners, developers, associated owners, a pecuniary interest disclosure being mandatory, and disclosure of additional interest. Now, these are significant changes here, Colin, compared to how the industry has operated for many years. In your position, being someone that has been an expert, I mean, you definitely would have an opinion to this, I would imagine.
Yeah, look, this is, I mean, if I could summarize it in terms of the two phases, this phase really has got to do with strata manager disclosure. And obviously, there's been a bit of media about insurance contracts, commissions, strata management agency agreements, and obviously disclosure of related parties. So this first tranche really deals with that. We'll go through it in more detail, Paul, and I will go through it in more detail.
Yeah,
But it's essentially managers must disclose any relationship with connected or related parties. They must obtain approval before obtaining commissions and benefits. It really, I suppose, for want of a better expression, the government sort of threw the book in terms of disclosure at the strata industry, and this is the result. There'll be more changes in the second phase at about the middle of this year, but these are really, that's the main takeaway, I suppose, of this first phase is really strata manager disclosure.
yeah. Thank you, Colin. And I mean, off the back of that, when you talk about that, we then go to an aspect where we look at insurance aspects and quote requirements. If your strata agent is obtaining quotes, obtaining the three quotes, and then having a quote breakdown. So really detailing what the premiums basically consist of these days. I mean, these are things, if you look at premium broker fees, commission aspects, but then you look at building, fire levies, etc. We're getting a bit more detailed and open documents to our clients that show the provisions of that. Any connections in that regard is always very important as well. So these are some things that is already come into place. And I think as an industry brought that in as of 1st July last year was some of the best practice and those requirements to be put into place. There were other changes, though, that I think were really important to touch on here. And I'm not sure your opinion on this, Colin, but there's some additional key reforms, including voting restrictions, where it really took a provision where it would prevent building managers, strata managers from voting by proxy on motions about their own commissions or training services or their own services. And I was quite astounded to hear this would occur because I don't think it's actually appropriate. In our organisation, don't like if strata managers actually, in fact, hold proxies for that purpose. And then there was the aspect definitions of connected persons that had been expanded and owners corporations being able to, apply to NCAT. So I put some of these items here in terms of voting restrictions, expanded definitions, tribunal orders, and restricted penalties. Probably sort of falls into your field when you look at all these things as an industry lawyer in terms of what you would deal and what you would see, I'd imagine.
Yeah, look, again, another reaction to obviously the review that the government undertook and obviously what some people here may have heard in the media. Look, in terms of just dealing with each of these points, voting restriction, look, it's an extension of the definition. It's really, in my view, a no-brainer extension that should have been made. I don't think it's going to have too many practical consequences for a lot of owners corporations, but it's a good, obviously a good change. This whole concept, the second one is whole concept of connected persons. And again, this directly relates to disclosure requirements. So this is a central definition. It's already in the legislation. It's now expanded again. In my view, a no-brainer expansion of the definition of connected persons, which makes it quite wide now. And again, this is really all on the shoulders of the strata manager and building manager. In terms of the compliance. The third point, in terms of tribunal orders, this is a new ability for an owners corporation to recover the money paid to money or benefit paid to a strata manager if the strata manager didn't disclose that as they're required to now, got the disclosure wrong, or made a disclosure in bad faith. From a practical perspective, I don't know how many cases or applications of this, will be made, but it's certainly another ability, and again, on the shoulders of strata managers to bear. What is significant is, increasing penalties, and they've almost doubled, and there's been other penalties that have increased. Again, in my experience, look, in terms of the work I do, I don't see a lot coming across my desk with penalties. I don't act a lot for strata management companies. This is something that's generally handled by fair trading, that department. But look, it's a doubling, and there's increased penalties, and that's also linked, obviously, to some of the significant changes that will take place later this year, and we'll go through that. But by way of example, the fair trading, or the department, has been given quite large, wide-ranging investigatory powers, and there's penalties that are attached to that for strata managers not complying. But again, these are, I suppose, the minor changes in this first phase. Important, but quite minor. Again, bearing in mind, the real push for this first phase is strata manager disclosure, consistent and accurate disclosure. Thanks.
Yeah, and the importance to note is good governance is always healthy, and it's becoming more and more important for schemes that effect too. So it's one of those things. But then we sort of go on to, Colin, when we look at the provisions of unfair contract terms. Now, these things, when we look at this, the Australian consumer law provisions regarding unfair contract terms now apply to strata agreements. And it gives, corporations, associations greater power to sort of challenge unfair contracts, and prohibits managers from limiting their liability or requiring indemnity from professional indemnity liabilities, etc. in this regard. And the one thing to touch on this is, I think, is very important in that regard, and one would automatically assume that. So, SEA has introduced a new agency agreement in this respect to address this, and these come across, owners, corporations, associations desks in that regard to address these concerns. But this was quite an interesting part when you look at that, in address.
Yeah, and look, and this is I should make clear, this is part of the sort of the second tranche that'll come into the middle of the year. Look, at present, there's an ability for an owner's corporation to make an application to the tribunal to settle a dispute or a complaint about, an agreement between the owner's corporation. So there's already an ability there, but what this does is link it to the federal, Australian consumer law. I won't delve into it too much, but it's quite a wide. The application law is quite wide. It goes a lot further than what the present law provides, and there's also remedies available, under that law, which arguably is more than what the tribunal can award. Now, where I believe this will really sort of raise its head is in relation to contracts between owners corporations and strata managing agents, owners corporations and building managers, and obviously contractor agreements. The last one, contract agreements, I think less chance of that happening, but probably the first two, there may be a little bit of movement happening with that. What I understand is happening is the Strata Community Association is preparing a new management agreement, or have already. They may amend it again. I think you'll find that by the time these changes come in, the agreements will be more aligned to not offend, any Australian consumer law. But it is quite a big change. Again, another sensible one, and in my view, expands the remedies and the ability of owners corporations to set aside very unfair contracts.
No, thank you, Colin. And just a reminder, we've got some questions coming up. We will be addressing them, and we'll either address them through the chat, but if they put them through the Q&A, we'll definitely be addressing them closer to the end of the session. And if we do run short on time, we'll try to run exactly on time. We'll definitely take time to ensure that they're responded to as part of that. Now, Colin, this is an interesting one because we the cost of living is coming up as a question here a lot more. And now there's an aspect to really address the provisions of financial hardship. This is a huge aspect because we talk media, cost of living, etc., so on. And the reforms are proposed, well, no longer proposing, but they're there very much to include important measures to assist owners experiencing financial hardship, like levy notices, including additional information about financial assistance. Committees having expanded power to authorise payment plans if they haven't done so at their AGM. In addition, the provision of notice periods for debt recovery having been being extended, really from 21 to at least 30 days from the 21-day period. So when we look at all these things in terms of levy reminders, recovery, debt collection, really wanting to address the holistic picture, there's a provision to consider this, but there's more of an obligation. I think it's explicitly clear when we look at this in terms of supporting owners on a payment plan. How do you see that changing from the existing measure to the actual way that they're proposing now?
Yeah, look, I think again, I think it's a double-edged sword. I mean, when you're an owners corporation trying to recover levies, say to pay for some important building works or major building works, you want the levies in as quickly as possible. But on the flip side of it, the economy isn't as good as it was pre-COVID, and people are suffering financially. There's also in the industry. Look, I don't do any debt recovery work for strata schemes or for owners in my business. I did a long time ago, but there was, there was a lot of levy recovery action undertaken where lot owners were left with significant debts because the legislation says that an owners corporation can recover the levies interest, but also the expenses in recovering the levies. In my view, the key takeaways for this change, and again, this is going to be in the second phase, is this. In terms of recovering expenses, an owners corporation can't simply say we've incurred $500 to try to recover the levy off you. Now, the only way you can recover, owners corporation can recover expenses is if a tribunal or court orders an amount of expenses to be paid to the owners corporation in a debt recovery action, right? And the owners corporation has first offered the owner the opportunity to enter into a payment plan. So firstly, the limit to recover expenses, but secondly, and this is probably the main point of this, is that there's a real emphasis now on owners corporations offering payment plans and attempting to enter into payment plans with lot owners rather than reverting to the traditional forms of debt recovery like taking legal proceedings first. There's, in
So are you
fact, in
saying,
my
Colin, when we look at this, is that it's first things first is to offer a payment plan before the corporation or its agent actually engages with the provision of debt collection, have to demonstrate a scenario of offering a payment plan as an
have to.
option of hardship management before they go down part of that?
Well, in fact, the owners corporation now must offer a payment plan if there's an outstanding levy. So the onus, in my view, is on the owners corporation to do that. There may be a case by case basis that each AGM they may determine what an average plan is. My view is it should be
Yeah.
done on a case by case plan basis. An owner can also propose a plan, and produce sufficient evidence. And an owners corporation can't reasonably refuse it. So there's a real emphasis on getting into a payment plan, and obviously, if the payment plan's not complied with, you can commence, proceedings. To me, look, from my perspective, I think it's sensible. There are lots of steps before parties need to resolve to litigation,
Yeah.
and this sort of forces the parties to have some form of communication about it. Now, obviously, if owners are refusing it, you can just go to legal. But it's a real emphasis on trying to sort out the debt without recourse to the courts. Obviously, that's fair for everyone. In terms of what's a fair payment plan, it'll depend on the amount of the debt and each person's circumstances. Don't take this as gospel at all, but I mean, my view is that a debt should be paid off within a year, including interest. But that's just my personal view. It may
We
be
note the act already states the 12-month
correct.
provision, but the aspect of a relationship and the communication and trying to mediate it as a provision beforehand, before going to the automatic provisions of levy recovery or debt collection, is key essential now, is what you're saying, in
Yeah,
simple
correct. And an owners
terms.
corporation can't recover those. So, someone's going to have phase one, we send you a levy reminder notice, and phase two is like a bit more of a lengthy demand. Those
Yes.
fees can't be recovered. So that's going to be a cost incurred by the owners corporation, which it has to pay for. The only way it can be recovered if it goes legal and you get an award of
Yeah.
expenses. So, yeah, look, it's something that, my view, each owners corporation will manage it differently. My view is, the best is to get on the phone or an email. A softly approach from strata committee members would be best. but sometimes they might not like want to deal with financial aspects of a scheme, or outstanding levies. But certainly some form of communication. If you want to streamline it, that payment plan, the initial letter should be, you've got X amount of outstanding levies, dollars of outstanding levies. Here's a proposed payment plan. Get back to us in so and so days. Otherwise, we'll take more action, and then you can engage that way. But it really is an emphasis on getting into payment plans. You have to do it to get expenses if you're gonna go sue. And again, an owners corporation can't unreasonably refuse. The other thing is, a slight thing is before you have to give a 21-day notice before you commence legal action. That's gone up to 30 days. It's not too much of a
No.
difference, but a lot will happen before you get to that stage, and in my view, should happen before you get to that stage.
Well, it definitely sounds like where an element of communication is available here for anyone in this regard is very much important to be recognised. I think in that respect,
Mm-hmm.
Colin, and ensuring that occurs is a nice way, shall we say, softly approach as you've suggested.
Yeah.
But then we go into the subject, and I'm not intending to jump around, but just sort of in the sequence of these new changes being implemented. We look at the aspect of professional service uplift, and I found this quite interesting. And to me, probably being in this industry for a while, it may be a little bit exciting, Colin. I'm not sure what your thoughts are. But looking at this, Strata managers required to provide regular reports every 6 months, while building managers must act in the best interests of the owners corporation. We're sort of unifying the provisions of services here, but also creating a report element to maybe provide to the owners is another aspect. And this is one of those key things that come into place, and the tribunal having, New South Wales Civil Administrative Tribunal having more powers in terms of these contracts. What's your take on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's at present, an owner, a strata manager must record their exercise of functions and present to the owners corporation, I think once every 12 months. That's been reduced now to 6 months. To me, again, it's another heavy compliance requirements on agents. And again, it ensures it's done, biannually instead of annually, but really it will ensure compliance with that provision to record the exercise of every
But do you
function.
see us,
Again, that might.
Colin, going just on that? Sorry to interrupt, but do you see us going to 6 monthly mandatory meetings to have these disclosures and reports presented? I mean, it says
No.
providing the report, but
Yeah.
is it just mail out? What's your take on this? I
Yeah,
mean,
well,
to
look,
me,
it'd
it
be an email.
says, yeah,
Yeah, it'd just be an email with a report or some sort of document, like a
yep.
report, which essentially in a table or a spreadsheet form, which gives a date, the exercise of the function, which manager, if there's several managers there, exercise that function, and perhaps even an outcome. And then that's just, you can send that to the Strata committee and all owners, if that's what they want every 6 months. I mean, it must be done anyway, but that is just done. You don't need to hold a meeting to do it. Again, if owners corporations want to have a meeting to discuss it or for it to be presented, that's a matter for them, between them and Jamison's, obviously. But it really, I suppose, puts a lot of pressure on the managers to record it, and record it consistently, not just perhaps a couple of weeks before the AGM. Not that Jamison's does it, but a couple of weeks before the AGM to go through and just fill it in, if at all. Okay. Again, this is just more compliance, disclosure, really just to cross T's and dot I's in terms of making sure that managers are doing what they're supposed to do. In terms of building
And
managers' response, sorry, go on.
in terms of this, and probably understanding to the building managers aspect, but the aspect of good governance and compliance is becoming a real health element to schemes under management. I think the more we look at it, we talk about so many elements of the building, but now today, how important of good governance and compliance and is a health measure in terms of schemes and clients. And if in what I was going to say, and you probably say this, is where you've got a building manager and they form part of that, they now form and integrate part of those services in terms of ensuring that that's delivered as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, the changes, again, these changes that will come in towards the middle of the year will, again, sort of aligning it, sum it all up, really aligning building managers' responsibilities, duties, etc., with strata managers. They're not the same, but aligning it and just making it a lot clearer. Look, that second point, third point in your slide, must act in best interests of owners, building managers. Well, the I'll call it the general law already provides for that. So it's just, I suppose, codifying it, putting in legislation, but saying something that's plainly obvious. And again, giving further ability to the tribunal to make orders. Again, I don't think there's going to be too much action there. The idea is this to, these new changes to come in, changes to be made in the industry, and then hopefully these sections never to be used. But one of the
Yeah.
interesting changes is that, an owners corporation can set aside a strata managing agency agreement and building managing agency agreement if they're conducting their duties contrary to the law. And I mean, that's really wide, what that means. I mean, I don't think you can term out a strata managing agency agreement if you see them jade walking to your building. But again, I don't see that there's going to be too many applications with this. But again, that gives me a little bit of concern as a lawyer, the wide ranging application of that. But again, I don't think too much practical effect for owners' courts.
No, thank you, Colin. We've got a few questions, and I can tell you it come out of those levy payment and the financial hardship slides that we're going to spend some time through the end of this to really address, because I think everyone will share those opinions through that. So then we go into the aspect of committee governance, and I mean, I've called this committee governance, but this is strengthening your committees, being if you're an association committee or a strata committee, because we're really talking about the application for strata schemes and community associations today, and enhanced maintenance requirements. And there's some restrictions delaying safety related building works in terms of what they can't in that regard, but also fair trading now having increased enforcement powers, and strata committees must provide reasons for refusing minor renovations. And the interesting part I found when I read through this was automatic approval for minor renovations if there's no response within 3 months. And then the other part, training requirements and duties for strata committee members. Now, this is a lot to take in that regard, but it's, when you look at this, there's a lot to happen in terms of that, in terms of governance and compliance, right?
Yeah, look, I mean, dealing with each of the dot points, restrictions on delaying building works affecting safety and amenity. That's essentially the owners corporation doesn't have to carry out repairs to the common property if they're already suing someone else, and it doesn't affect the safety or amenity. There's been an additional provision, added to that, which doesn't really change the effect of it too much. Look, my view with these sort of things are, waterproofing issues, fire issues, that if the building's got waterproofing, fire issues or defects like that, and even if they're suing a builder or developer or someone else, they still should have to, or may have to still repair the common property. So not too much practically there that's changing.
Because we've always had the
point,
clause under section
correct.
106.4, which says if you're taking
That's right.
action against for those works, but you would ideally look at a resolution at a general meeting, I assume, before you did anything, right?
Well, look, again, my view is that you don't need a decision on that. The law, that section states that they can defer compliance. My view is it's always prudent to have some sort of form of decision, be it a strata committee, unless restricted, or the owners corporation. But in terms, look, that's already there. What has been added is, if not carrying out the works will adversely affect a person's access
Yes.
or the use of common property. That's been addition added. And again, it just solidifies what's there. It's not too major the change. Dealing with the second point, again, this is what I spoke of just at the outset about fair trading having these crazy increased powers to investigate and force owners corporations to fix common property. And I say crazy, but what I mean is powerful, really big. Whether it gets used and the government is stocked with enough workers to make it work, we'll see. I don't expect anything to practically happen until the end of the year. That's my view. But again, as I said before, they can go in, investigate, enforce, fine, penalise, it's pretty serious and wide ranging. Hopefully, it won't need to be used.
And for me, what interests me is how is this enacted upon? Is this something where it's determined based on a mediation application, etc., or is it something of a phone call or a complaint that they act as an intermediary to help, to assist? Is one of those things. It'd be very interesting to see how that comes through and how it can support and provide provisions in that. I mean,
Yeah.
we've experienced with the Building Commission's office with building defects and how they've come in to assist in that regard. And while it may not give every single outcome it's required in the perfect world, I think it's sort of tend and increase the level of alert and care by original owners, etc., in that regard. So maybe it's one of those provisions, and who knows, we might have another department that assists us in that way.
Yeah, look, we'll just unfortunately we'll just have to wait and see. Look, fair trading now is sort of an information service for owners, and they've got some compliance and enforcement provisions for managers, but this expands it a lot more to really enforcing an owner's corporation to repair and maintain common property or carrying out investigatory uh, action.
Yep.
Again, hopefully it won't need to be used. It's just there to wag the legislative finger at owners, corps, and managers. But it's obviously a good thing and a reaction to the review. In terms of
Yeah.
the biggest takeaway for Strata Committee from this one is, well, it's really a minor renovation. So I would say so. At the moment, minor renovations can only be approved by an owners corporation passing an ordinary and majority resolution in a general meeting, unless the owners corporation has delegated the function of determining minor renovations to the Strata Committee, and then the Strata Committee has to pass a majority resolution in a meeting. There's no time periods in terms of to determine it. But what these new changes do is essentially impose on the owners corporation 3 months to consider a request, and if they don't, consider a request and respond in writing with reasons refusing it or approving it, then what the new changes say is that it's automatically assumed or taken that the owners corporation approved that minor renovation. The owner can go ahead and do it. So time periods are important, and obviously the owners corporation has got to be on top of it. What is also important is reasons have to be given as to why it is refused. And in my view, reasons should also be given if there's any conditions imposed. My view is it's prudent also to give reasons as to why the conditions would be imposed. The whole idea
And
about
I
all
mean,
this is,
in our experience, there's always been reasons provided in this. So I was quite interested to see no response. I mean, it's an owner's right. And just to confirm, we're talking minor renovations, we're talking flooring applications, kitchen renovations, we're
aircon. Yeah,
talking these aircon stuff like this. So it's quite interesting to see. And I thought, really, do people do this in that regard?
yeah. So look, in terms of the process, look, an owner has got to make a request to carry out minor renovations. That's usually done in writing. It can be by an email to the strata manager or the secretary, or it can be, to present a motion to a strata committee or owners corporation meeting to consider it. That's, in my view, the better way to do it. But that sort of starts the process. So whenever you get that email asking for minor renovations, or a motion to consider at the next general meeting to approve minor renovations, that's when the clock starts ticking. The committee should meet, preferably formally, but if not informally, to discuss it and prepare a response, and then make a decision and give reasons. But it's that's when the clock will start. I know there's a question there: what if owners neglect to submit a request to renovate and they just carry out the renovations? Well, they are unauthorised renovations, and the owners corporation can take action, to recover. I mean, for those works to be removed and the common property restored.
Thank you. And I think just sort of recapping it, thank you, Colin. That was very thorough in that regard. It's when we look at the next part of importance of disclosure, just touching on that of what we've already touched on. But then we go to some developer accountability. And this was, I think, I found very interesting here. Oops, sorry, gone too forward, is about responsibility. Now we're facing increased accountability through independent certification, requirements for maintenance schedules, um, levy estimates, I mean, the budgets that come into place, and helping new owners in these schemes that are being built and execute repairs, and the implication of penalties for not holding the first AGM on time. I always thought this was in place, but I think they've made it much more clearer.
Yeah, it was. They've just upped the penalties like they have generally for everything. Look, there's already requirements that were put in 2015 and a few other amendments after that when this new legislation came in about developers having to provide certain documents to the owners corporation for the first AGM. And in my experience, that largely happens, but there are some developers that don't do that. Look, there are too many stories of schemes being set up with building managers and strata managers there on perpetual contracts and all these other agreements, and basically, levies being set at $1 for the first year and then $100,000 the next year. This is all designed just to, reduce the chance of that happening, put the onus back on the developer to get things right when they hand over the scheme, and obviously creates liability. If they don't do the right thing, owners can come back at them. Again, from my experience, and I'm not a large law firm, I'm a smaller law firm, but from the colleagues I've spoken to, there's not been a lot of cases and developments in this area with developers, because usually either they've got the document or they don't, and if they don't, you're really going to go spend thousands of dollars getting a fine imposed. Fair trading haven't, imposed that. So, look, this is good. It's encouraging. It's moving more down the track of, reducing any surprises for new schemes. It won't remove them, but it should certainly lessen it. Look, in my experience, this, how developments are handed over is so different now than it was, say, 10 years ago. It's so much
And
better, and
Colin,
there's still problems, but there always will be.
but just to add to that, these initial maintenance schedules, when they made a requirement, geez, it helps when you're preparing a 10-year plan for the scheme. It's providing, as a strata managing agent for us, it gives us better knowledge of the building's assets, the scheme, provision of the value of the asset costs for maintenance, and using that when you're preparing a 10-year plan really gives some understanding, so you're not sort of missing it, especially if you're a scheme under management or association, getting to know the aspects. So it's one of those things that it has become a very helpful tool when you're a nurse corporation or a committee or an association or strata managing agent having to manage these day to day. And I know what we're sort of sitting is putting these into schedules and asset schedule plans and preparing that to be able to assign that through our repairs and maintenance team to be able to schedule and report on that when regular maintenance provisions come up as well.
Yeah, look, it's all about planning. Look, strata schemes are created a birth on the day the strata plan is registered, and before that, it was all owned by the developer, and then this new entity comes along, and then new owners come in and buy or take possession. It's all new. The developer knows everything. They built it, and together with the builder, and so this is just about ensuring that the owners corporation is given as much information as possible to get on with managing this scheme, but also to ensure that the developer has done everything they're supposed to do, for the quote unquote handover. So look, again, all in the right direction. And whether there'll be increased penalties imposed or NCAT action, I doubt that from a practical perspective, but it's all heading in the right direction.
Thank you. Yeah. Now, Colin, this is an interesting one. Embedded networks. Now, we hear a lot about it, we talk a lot about it, but embedded networks. Now, these reforms are actually getting into the detail of embedded networks, electricity, gas, and really coming into the provisions of implementing a 3-year term limit, and new disclosure requirements, ensuring buyers are aware of embedded networks at the point of sale. One would think this was already in place, but it doesn't seem as though it is. And all this is coming a point to limit these terms and put all these provisions in place. How do you see that as terms of the existing current arrangements to the change?
Look, there's savings and transitional provisions which essentially make it apply from when this will apply, which will be in the middle of the year. This is again a part of the phase 2. In terms of what it is, look, I mean, this is a sort of another reaction from the legislator to these building management agreements. Years ago, that schemes were developed. They had building managers in there, contracts signed before the scheme came into existence, or just after, when the developer owned everything, for 20, 30, or essentially perpetual building management agreements for unbelievable amounts of money. It happened with strata managers, and it also happened with embedded networks, where these networks and agreements were set up between the developer and a network provider, and the owners corporation, which was birthed when the strata plan was registered, inherits all this, and sometimes it's out of it. So to me, it brings it in line with the limits imposed on strata managers and building managers, limits on the terms of their agreement, and that if an agreement is entered into while the developer is in it, it's got a limit as well. So again, nothing groundbreaking here, other than the fact it's sort of extending those provisions from building managers and strata managers, and owners corporations inheriting these sort of agreements. They've extended it to embedded networks. So again, you can there'll be ability to set them aside. Unfair contract provisions will still apply to that as well when they come in. But if nothing else, it'll be a three-year limit for really for bad ones. Again, this in my view will remove. Then there will be a lot of, not a lot of, I don't think there'll be a lot of litigation. There'll certainly be a lot of legal work, a lot of to and fro with embedded network providers, and a lot of renegotiation, I believe, with existing. That's what I found. When there were changes to the building managers and strata managers, there was a lot of renegotiation. It was a good opportunity to do that. So again, another really good thing, bringing in line with other aspects of services provided to owners corporations, and should come in about the middle of the year.
And I think what we would love to see, if there was some sort of formal guide for our schemes and our clients to be able to use when they're encountering these embedded networks and these provisions to put into place, then it would help, because I think, understanding these can be quite complex documents. So some sort of simple guide that could expect it and allow provisions of experts getting involved to negotiate that and settle, but making this clear to a utility provider about what their obligations are and setting the terms will be really important. Now, talking on embedded networks, we go into the next part. We're talking about sustainability and accessibility here. So we're looking in line with broader environmental impacts. We're really touching on inclusive goals in terms of sustainability. But the interesting part, Colin, is you can't have bylaws that prevent sustainability just solely on appearance these days. So, if I'm wrong, but I think majority of the time bylaw 17 relates to the appearance of the lot, and it could be used, but this is basically sort of saying you can't make a bylaw on that basis or have that in that regard. And considering sustainability at an AGM, so within the AGM agenda, considering sustainability, including it in your capital works fund estimates or your 10-year plans, and it's a simple majority voting requirement. So to me, when you look at changing bylaws, okay, there's the exception for heritage listed properties, but the change in bylaws, banning the bylaws to do that, okay, I understand. But when we look at considering sustainability at each AGM, including, sustainability in the capital works fund, proposed budget, etc., I mean, what do you think means considering sustainability in AGM? Is it just acknowledging it, or is it actually getting metrics of data?
Well, it's just, look at one respect, a scheme doesn't have solar panels, considering whether they should put solar panels on there, considering they should put an EV charger, considering whether they should put, environmentally friendly lighting, etc. So, it's just to consider it. There's no action that needs to be taken. Now, this whole there's a question about accessibility infrastructure and sustainability infrastructure. Really lovely long-letted words. What it really means is, environment. Sustainability is really environment. Solar, electricity, I think saving the environment. And in terms of accessibility, it's how to access the scheme. Okay, so for disabled people, etc. So it's imposing a requirement on owners to consider all this each year. They don't have to take any action; just consider it, have a discussion, and then move on. What is what is what is important, I think, is that a bylaw. So a bylaw can't be refused by an owners corporation for sustainable infrastructure. For example, a bylaw can't be refused for a lot owner to put solar panels on the roof of its building because it's just going to make the whole scheme ugly. Okay. If that's the reason an owners corporation gives to refuse such a bylaw, then it's of no force and effect.
And
Okay.
so, Colin, in your position, installation of solar panels, you believe as a lawyer and industry lawyer here is an owner requires a bylaw for the installation of solar panels? Just, I mean,
Yeah, look,
taking it
assuming
anything
the
here?
roof, the roof is common property, which it usually is the roof structure. Because you're altering common property, you need the authorization of the owners corporation to do that. Usually, that's done by a special resolution. 75% for, I'll call it, but it's a different definition. What these ones do, these sustainability, sort of bylaws, and it's called sustainability infrastructure motion. It removes the requirement for the 75%
Yeah,
to pass the bylaw and just makes it, a majority, right? So it
yeah,
makes it easy. And again, that's just a message from the government, in my view, to say, look, if you guys want to go green, or you should be considering to go green, working towards going green, and we're going to make it as easy as possible for you to go green. So that's essentially it. So look, practically, I think there's going to be a lot more solar panels going up on buildings where they weren't before. There were some reasons given. But I don't see too much movement at present. The sustainability infrastructure motion is already defined in the present legislation. It's already a 50, a
yeah,
majority, so it's already there. There's just a few little tweaks here. The most important, the most pressing one is, disallowing bylaws that refuse, sustainable infrastructure because of appearance, unless it's a heritage building, of course.
yeah. Thank you. So just finalising position, because we've got a lot of our clients here, and one of the things that we touched on is commission training services, approval of payments, if they're commissions or provisions in that regard. We remain to forgo our insurance commission to the 100% benefit of our clients. We do have a few brands that have joined us recently that have been joined part of the Jameson's team. They stayed the same, but they obviously have the provision to receive the commission rebate or the foregoing of the commission by getting in touch. The one thing that I've always touched on is our firm's policy on training expenses and services, and just reaffirming that's something that we have a wonderful HR team that works absolutely extensively in setting an annual training plan. If that probably overtraining them, but that's something that we do when we pay for our own training, if they're industry experts or industry specialists in that regard. So it's one of those things that definitely come into place that I thought we would want to touch on. But being transparent is huge for us in what we mean to our clients in that regard. Colin,
Yes,
summary of obligations here. Now, we talk about these aspects, and I just wanted to really get onto this because I saw this as interesting. Pre-appointment disclosure requirements. Now, this is general, but you look at, strata managers having increased disclosure obligations even before they're appointed, right? If that's,
correct.
hey, I know Colin Cuneo or John Smith is a scheme that we've managed and we've been invited here, having to be provided and in writing too. Disclosure of connected parties as a strata manager, sort of like the Corporations Act when you look at that and you sit on the
Yep.
board. But then the aspects of during the appointment of disclosure, so our clients can expect to hear from us a lot more if it's generally in that regard, on these regard in terms of disclosure requirements, and insurance quote transparency is a huge takeaway in this respect as well, in terms of
Yeah.
opening up what you need to show and produce.
Yeah, look, it's all on you guys. You guys being the strata managers, and it's consistent, right? If your brother-in-law, works at an air conditioning company, right, and that's one of the preferred contractors of Jamison's, then you've got to disclose that your brother-in-law works at air conditioning company. It's one of the contractors, and the owners can do what they want with it, but as long as it's disclosed, much like lawyers. So it's continual, and agreements strata management agreements can be set aside if proper disclosure isn't given.
Mm.
If it isn't updated as soon as it is, as soon as it is, as soon as it is changed, I mean, it is really, it's really quite strict. So my view
Yeah.
again, be safe than sorry. Always over disclose. Much like with
Yeah,
strata
definitely.
committees,
Yeah.
look, strata committees, if you've got an indirect or direct pecuniary interest, with the law that it was, it's changing as well. But the law that it was that, a strata committee member that had a direct, indirect community interest only had to disclose that to the committee. And then once they had the disclosure, it could, they could pretty much go on. That's obviously changing, but it's aligning to that as well. Sort of, look, the law may say, you can't, a strata manager can't act if, their brother-in-law works for an air conditioning company. That's out, right? But the law doesn't actually say that now. What it says is you've got to disclose it, right? And it's up to, the owner's corporation, the client, to say, look,
That's right.
I
Yeah.
don't like it. I'll move on. I'll go to the market, or, I accept it. It's fine. It's not a problem. But at least they know. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's the disclosure
S-
requirements. Sorry. And I've got to make. Sorry, just got a question about it as well. It applies to strata managers and building managers, although the requirements on strata managers are a lot stricter because the legislation provides, it poses a lot more requirements on strata managers. But there are requirements on building managers as well. Absolutely.
And in terms of provisions here, is the disclosure provision is that it's at the client's discretion. It's disclosed and it's up to them to decide. And it's about providing notice and keeping the client aware. And that's a provision. And I know we've got a huge disclosure schedule that comes out, and owners will see that in their AGM packs, or it will arise through the session and through the year. And these are things that we look at when we look at during the appointment. These disclosures are going to actually arise. So putting this in off the back of what you're saying there, Colin, written explanations for commission training services, approvals, if they're not disclosed, that you need to seek in that regard. I think it's very straightforward, and it should be always that regard. But it's a
Look,
client's freedom
can
of choice in that respect.
can I just pop in? Look, all I can say here is common sense. Okay. If your brother-in-law
Yeah.
works for an air conditioning contractor and they're one of 20 that work for Jamison's, right? Disclose it. It's not an issue. If you're a shareholder in your brother-in-law's air conditioning company and also proposing to be the manager, common sense will tell you don't be the manager, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's really just a reflection of what common sense is,
Yeah.
and just to remove any of
Yeah.
these, surprises. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what for our owners' interest and their sakes, what you're going to see in the AGM disclosure is requirements at the AGM. Strata managers disclosing connection with suppliers. You'll have this as a report that will come into place. You'll have connections, if there is any, with the original owner, building developers. If there's any connections with service providers in the past 12 months, and on the existing, if you've currently got it, you'll see the provision. If your agent is taking a commission, they'll disclose what they received in the last 12 months, what they propose to need 12 months, and expected training services in that regard. We have taken a position that anyone part of our Jamesons, we will fully pay for training services, and the clients that have come on board that have formed part of the Jamesons family recently will also be given the opportunity to remove that commission element as well, eventually in due course, if they wish. So these are the real things that you'll see in the AGM packs that come up, and I think it's always good. And as we've sat and done training with our strata managers, it's open up, have a discussion about them, make them aware, and it's a provision. We're already doing it at committee meetings, disclosing any having members, etc. So it's a good, healthy way.
Yeah.
Um, so
I should also mention, sorry, that I'm charging Jamison's for this for doing
oh
this
yes,
presentation, and that will be disclosed to owners corporations as it has in the past as well. So again, it's all about disclosure, unlinked
yeah.
transactions, I suppose, and knowledge being provided to the client at the end of the day, and then they can make decisions as they see fit.
Yeah. And we wouldn't have it any other way to hold anyone accountable by ensuring it's a paid for contractual service in that regard, Colin. Thank you.
Yeah, reasonably paid for. Okay, Paul, do you want me
Now
to? There's been. Sorry, go on.
we've done good on timing, so we're actually at Q&A in that regard.
Paul, do you want me to go through all the questions and give an answer, or do you want to go through it together? I'm easy. I can speak fast and
So
probably get through all of them.
yes, and what I would love to be able to do is, while I would love to do that, Colin, I'd probably pick a few here. And what I will do for everyone on this webinar, I know we've got 5 minutes left. We will be, with Colin and my work, we'll actually be preparing a response to each and every one of these, in that regard, and circulating shortly after this webinar. Not today, probably tomorrow or Friday in that regard. So there was one thing that I'm probably going to encapsulate in one. There was a lot of questions raised about payment plans, Colin, and levies, which was a big one in that regard. Now, the first sort of scenario came in: would the Strata manager alert the owners corporation about outstanding levies in that regard? Yes. The owners, that your committee will be made aware in that regard. How does a levy recovery work with a strata loan and a payment plan? That's actually a good one. If the owner's corporation's got a strata loan, and you've got the monthly installment plans, and you've got levy arrears in place, like that, it's actually a good question to really consider here in this regard.
Yeah, look, I mean, look, to me, I view them separately. So strata loan is money coming in to the owners to fund something, and levies is also money coming in, but it's from owners. So I think you've got to look at through it separately, because you'll have a loan, an owners corporation will have a loan to get money in for whatever purpose, but then they'll need to raise either a regular periodic levy or a special levy to pay off the loan. Okay, so that's where you've got to look at it. You've got to look at it from levies have been raised and issued. Now they're outstanding. Let's go for payment plan. Now, in terms of, I mean, so in my view, a strata loan, having a strata loan or not, does not affect any payment plan or any proposal or any outcome. It's just another expense of the owner's corporation for which it must budget for and raise levies for. And again, if the payment plan is breached, the owner's corporation's got the door open to go and commence proceedings for recovery.
Thank you. And Colin, I mean, is it, the one point here is it mandatory for an owner's corporation to allow payment plans to the lot owners? Can an option for a payment plan be voted against at an AGM?
Right.
I think,
So,
let's clear this up, because we know we've got existing payment plans, and the max period is 12 months from when the levy falls due or falls into arrears. Is it mandatory? Does the owners corporation or a community association here, have to allow for payment plans? Can they vote against it at an AGM and say, we don't allow it?
Yeah, there's a lot of yeses here, but I'll go through it I'll go through it in my crazy way. So at the moment, they don't, but I'm talking the phase two about the middle of the year. Yes, an owners corporation must allow a payment plan before they can, in my view, before they can start, any action. Yes, an owner's corporation can vote down a payment plan if presented at an AGM. It may be presented at a strata committee meeting. It may be presented at an extraordinary or other general meeting. Okay. But again, the owner's corporation, and again, speaking from the middle of the year, the owner's corporation cannot unreasonably refuse a payment plan.
Yeah. Thank you, Colin.
And again, and I should also mention, the impetus for the owner's corporation going through payment plans is that they can't recover their expenses going down the path of legal or pre-legal, right, until they at least, have offered it.
I've offered a payment plan. No, thank you. Now, Colin, there's an element we talked about, and we touched on strata committee training, and the question was, what do we mean by governance requirements, retraining, and strata committee duties? When we look at that, yeah, go for it.
Sorry. Look, it's just this, again, coming in the middle of the year, right? There's going to be a requirement for each member of a strata committee, and again, it's also the same for community associations. They're generally the same for both, to do a training course. But again, it says it's going to be prescribed by the regulations. The regulations haven't been drafted, so we've got to wait till that comes out, and that will say, what it will be. I'm sure it will be some sort of online course, but yeah, everyone's going to have to do that. And again, the requirements or the duties imposed on strata committee members to act fairly, honestly, it's just been expanded a bit more, really, to reflect what the law says and what common sense says, when you're in a position of that. But there will be this, training requirement, and that's what everyone will have to do. Again, hopefully it'll result in a few less disputes and better governance.
No, thank you. And Colin, I mean, when we talk about embedded networks, when they
Mm.
apply these changes and these limitations on contract, would they by default impact and take effect to existing contracts in place? Would they be applied there? I mean, in terms of contract law, here it is, I've had a contract for 5 years. It's maybe got a 10-year term. Let's use hypothetics. And
I think,
middle of this year, the
yeah,
3-year term comes in.
yeah. Look, I'd love to go to the actual section, but my recollection is that to the extent that there's a 10-year embedded network plan, that will be limited to 3 years after the commencement of the section, right?
Yep.
Actions under the section, yeah. So that again it'll align essentially with strata management. The strata management changes that said, from this date, it doesn't matter what your agreement was, it's a maximum of 5, right?
Yep.
It's going to be similar to that. So there's not going to be a lot of blowback. It's not going to apply retrospectively in that regard for making the law that's going to apply in the middle of the year apply a year ago. It's not going to do that. But again, from what I've said before, it'll really push owners and better network companies to meet together to renegotiate, ultimately fairer contracts to owners corporations.
Yeah. Now, finally, we've had a question in terms of revised management agreements in that regard to be developed and implemented. Please do contact your strata manager. There were recent communication out, but please do contact your strata manager. They are ready. They are available. Please have the discussion. They're there to facilitate and provide you a copy of the agreement and even consider removing the commission elements in that regard. I want to thank you, Colin, for attending today's session and for everyone attended. We couldn't get through all the questions, but they were fantastic. And we are definitely going to provide a response to all of them and circulate them through. And I'm sure we would circulate them to everyone along with the slides. It's been a wonderful session. To sum up what you've seen today in terms of phase 2, understanding phase 1 has been a real application of what's happening now. Phase 2 comes through the middle of the year. So I'm actually really delighted and part of the Jameson's team. And thank you, Colin, for attending to be able to give you a head start of what is up and coming. And I think, taking this little bit of information, we probably definitely will have another session in terms of what the regulations produce and how that those changes will be applied is a big aspect, but there'll be definitely more of that. And I like doing this because it's much easier than sending emails, shall we say. But Colin Cuneo, thank you very much for attending this evening session. Thank you, everyone, and thank you very much for the questions. Wishing you all a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. All the
Thank
best.
you.
Thank you.
Cheers.